The theme for today is privacy and freedom of speech and its impact on internet governance. So for you, those of you who are here in the morning sessions would have had an opportunity to hear about some of the global debates that are happening on internet governance. There's a lot of policy action that's been happening, especially this crucial year, with September 2015 going to be an important year for the INR transition, and global multi-stakeholder debates. And in India too, there has been a lot of debate on this. This has been so far an intense year, especially with the Supreme Court verdict on some provisions of the Information Technology Act. We have panelists here who are quite competent to speak on some of the legal as well as political issues. But to provide a lay of the land, I'm just going to invite Yashovardhan Asad, who is the Information Commissioner. So if I can ask you to start, provide us with a brief overview on where things stand, especially with regard to the focus on privacy and freedom of speech, and from your perspective, where the right to information stands on digital concerns. Thank you.
Distinguished members of the panel, ladies and gentlemen, let me at the very outset thank ASSOCHAM for giving me an opportunity to be here and be able to contribute on a subject which is of extreme importance right now. It's about internet, which has permeated our lives in a fashion which we wouldn't have imagined about 20 years back. And even for technically challenged people like I am, we are virtually dependent on the internet for almost every important things. We have some politicians here whose lives have been really impacted by the internet. The public is chasing them almost every day, and not once in 5 years, as used to be earlier. Let me start by saying that India's digital plan is also very ambitious. It talks about providing internet to everyone, and in the process create a tremendous potential for the economy and also in form of jobs. The statistics regarding the number of phones and the number of internet connections we have is also staggering. Suffice to say that even with the 10% internet coverage, we are the third largest internet market in the world. Can I just put this down? Yeah. Let me at the very outset come to the definition of internet governance, because that's very important and is the key thing for this session. In fact, the working group set up by the World Summit on Information Society held in Tunis, which gave its report in June 2005, stated, and I quote, "Internet governance is the development and application by governments, the private sector and civil society in the respective roles of shared principles, decision-making procedures, and programs that shape the evolution and the use of internet." Professor Joan Korbalija, an authority on the subject, gives a broader concept to intergovernance, stating that it goes beyond the technical aspects and also addresses issues which are legal, economic, and developmental. And today, therefore, with the broad parameters that we have, we generally refer to both the technical aspects as well as the public policies related to the exchange of information over internet. Now, apparently in the first 3 sessions today, you have discussed some very critical items, that is the global governance of internet and net neutrality. India's latest stand on global governance of internet would have hardly been articulated, because I understand one of the representatives of the ministry would have been here in the afternoon. Now, a number of nations since 2003 have talked about more transparent, democratic, and multinational governance of internet. In fact, some countries driven by cybersecurity and other concerns have also challenged the monopoly control of the internet and have argued for storing more internet data within the country, ensuring also control and management of servers. I'm given to understand that even the National Security Council Secretariat in India had also argued for and had requested that India ask for data for all the traffic data related to the domain names originating from India. Now, in the various international conferences, various models of international governments have been given, whether it is multi-stakeholderism or multilateralism. And today it is important that India takes a stand on that. I understand that the matter is before the group of ministers, but it's of critical importance that India enunciates its policy on the issue. Now, let me broadly spell out the broad objectives of the internet governance as it's related to public policy, and that is the internet governance in India should strive for three things. One is to make the internet more safe, more secure, that is from the hackers, cyber criminals, etc., etc. To make it more secure from the anti-national elements or the terrorists who lure new recruits, plan operations, and thirdly, by facilitating robust growth, it is implied that it should continue to provide a platform for vibrant exchange of ideas, respecting, of course, the domain of privacy, so that no illegal trade of private data is allowed, which is accessed from the internet. Now, it will be ideal if the internet self-regulates itself. We have examples of such regulation in India when the Press Council of India had laid down the norms of journalistic conduct, and Mr. Manish Tiwari would be very well conversant with this, as also the principles of ethics laid down by the News Broadcasters Association. However, the world we live in is not an ideal one. The governments have to intervene, whether on account of terrorism, whether on account of immediate and present danger to public order. And as somebody said, internet governance is all about governments. And the level of governmentalization in apostrophe depends on how democratic the country is and how robust your institutions are. Now, nothing describes better the absolute right to privacy than William Pitt's statement, that famous statesman in UK in the 18th century, who says that the poorest man in his cottage defies all the forces on the ground. It may be frail, its roof may shake, the wind may blow through it, storms may enter, the rain may enter, but the King of England cannot enter. All his forces dare not cross the threshold of ruined tenements. Now, in India, the right to privacy was recognized by the Supreme Court. There are eminent lawyers here. I don't have to elaborate on it. And this was in the year of '62 in the case of Kharak Singh versus the state of UP, where it was said that it was an essential ingredient of the right to life and liberty under Article 21. Hence, the right to privacy is an integral right, and it has to be protected from intrusion from both the state and from other individuals. The Right to Information Act 2005, with I am closely associated, also recognizes that. It recognizes the freedom of information, but it has also safeguards under Section 81J, where any information which is personal and there is no overriding public interest to declare it will not be disclosed. And therefore, it's interesting to note that paradoxically, the right to privacy recognized as a fundamental right by the Supreme Court has found articulation by way of a safeguard through, though limited, against information disclosure under the RTI Act. In India, there is no law relating to data protection or privacy, and privacy rights have evolved through an interpretative process. Now, in the digital world, protection of individual data is a critical area which needs to be looked at very, very closely. Even in UK, internet and consumer privacy have become a matter of concern. And according to the report of Global Surveillance Monitor, personal data from government computers are sometimes disclosed inadvertently. Illegal trade of personal data amongst the police and private detectives have also come to knowledge. And because of this, there is a great concern in Britain, and the matter is also debated. In fact, one of the examples cited is the case of Ministry of Defense in UK losing a laptop with personal data of 60,000 recruits. Another important attribute of the right to privacy is the right to be forgotten, a right which is being addressed in many countries in Europe. In fact, the EU had proposed an amendment as the right to be forgotten, which will give users the authority to direct the website to permanently delete the data which is of personal nature and belongs to them. Now, the Data Protection Authority in UK is vested in the Information Commissioner's office. Not for a moment am I suggesting that it should be given to us. We are already overloaded, and in fact, we are waiting for more members to arrive so that they can share our burden. I've been given a deadline that I better finish soon, which helps me. Now, the second part which I'm wanting to talk about is the internet safety from the hands of cyber crimes, criminals who are doing hacking, because this has reached also humongous proportions. And according to the Norton Cyber Crime Report 11, the total number of cyber crime figures had touched almost 431 million just 2-3 years back. Now, to tackle cybercrime on a war footing, the investigating agencies in the country have to be really geared up. Most of the states have their cybercrime cells, but since it is relatively a newer subject, it needs the guiding hand also from the industry. And this is where the IT industry can actually collaborate by helping out, training the professionals so that our investigations are better, better evidence is put to court, and better convictions are achieved. Now, internet security is one of the reasons why more and more nations are going for internet governance. The use of internet by the tourists, by the terrorists, is a matter of serious concern, and in most of the terrorist modules which you have busted in this country, you have seen the stamp of very smart professionals who have used this platform for luring recruits, exchange of ideas, and also planning operations. Because of this, there is a knee-jerk situation in certain countries. There is data mining on a humongous scale. There is Edward Snowden report, which you have seen, in which many of the countries are worried by the scale of surveillance. Recently, the Federal Appeals Court has overturned this, saying that this was not with the authority of the Congress. In Britain, again, the GCHQ is mining data on a very large scale for their use. And concerns have been raised also in this country about the central monitoring scheme in the country, which sees a cross-section of interdata and monitors the electronic surveillance data. In the end, let me just say that freedom of expression is certainly a cherished right, and it should be respected. It goes back to the Greek Athenian era, almost 2,400 years back. But this has to be tempered. Today, in a democracy like ours, we have to face issues like the hate blogs and slurring remarks which fan communal passions, and also have the potential to destabilize the polity. And hence, it is very, very important that while the freedom of expression has to be tempered with this, the state also has to ensure that its security agencies don't act out of overzealousness. I'm very happy that this topic that is why been chosen today by the ASSOCHAM, and I thank the ASSOCHAM for giving me this opportunity and bringing together such eminent people from different walks of life to contribute and articulate their opinion on this subject. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for that overview of what's happening globally, and thank you for bringing the reference to the Tunis agenda and the role of civil society and private stakeholders, and the mandate in the Tunis agenda that both of them have to be at par or have to perform in their respective roles with regard to internet governance, especially on privacy and freedom of speech. And I'm hoping that other panelists follow up on that key issue of where do private stakeholders in India, including civil society, stand. Two of our panelists today are unfortunately in a bit of a hurry. I'm Sri Tiwari and Dr. Patra. So I'm going to ask both of you. I'm going to ask Sri Tiwari to go first and provide, first of all, an overview of these concerns as to how they were addressed during the UPA regime, and then I think it makes logical sense for Dr. Patra to follow next and perhaps answer some of the concerns that Sri Tiwari may raise on concerns or criticisms that he may raise on the issues of privacy and freedom of speech with regard to this government. Sir? And I would request all panelists to keep their remarks short, say 5 to 6 minutes. Thank you.
Distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thank SOCHM for inviting me to this extremely vital discussion on internet governance. On quite a few occasions, I have articulated, and I'll reiterate, that the internet is one such creation of humankind which it understands less and less. Forget trying to understand God's creations. Here is a creation of humankind which it is not able to configure. What the internet has done in the past 15 years is that it has redistributed the concentration of power from the states, the institutions, into the hands of the individual. And this is with only 3 billion people as we speak online. Imagine in 5 or 8 or 10 years from now, when you would have all the 8 billion people, or at least 90% of them, online, what kind of a world would it look like? The mistake that we make when we talk about internet governance is that we try and extrapolate the rules of the physical world to a virtual world. The fact is that humanity has created a virtual civilization. A virtual civilization which has its own rhythm, which has its own dynamics, and it has its own norms. So therefore, this penchant in the internet governance debate to try and see the internet as an extension of the human self is possibly contradictory in terms, because the genie is out of the bottle. The virtual civilization, whether we like it or not, ladies and gentlemen, has a life of its own. Even if all the evil auguries of the world were to come together to try and circumscribe expression on the internet, for the love of God, it would remain free, because it is impossible to circumscribe on a scale as vast as what the internet has become. In fact, whatever is today said in Vancouver can hurt the sensibilities of somebody in Vanuatu. Now, that is a reality, whether you like it or not, you have to live with. Because the freedom of speech and expression includes in it the right to offend. And unfortunately, there would be certain Charlie Hebdos which will take place. Certain people would try and use the gun where the word should suffice. But unfortunately, that is the kind of world that we live in. And therefore, the sooner people get used to the reality that it is impossible to try and contain the freedom of expression, the better it would be. And the biggest example of this is China. China has firewalled the internet and has converted it into a massive intranet. But even the Chinese, with all their technology, with all their censorship, with all the astroturfing which they do, are not able to contain the million mutinies which the 600 million registered subscribers on Weibo or the 84 million people who use it every day unleash. So therefore, there is a lesson which needs to be learned, that you can balkanize the net, you can disconnect the net, but you will not be able to really stop the freedom of speech and expression on the net. Which of course then brings you to the very troubling question that what do you do about pornography, especially child pornography, the depravity which is there on the net, what is called the dark net. The reality is, unfortunately, since you have different value systems in this world, some more permissive, some more promiscuous than the others a little orthodox, this is a reality that you'll have to live with till the time some agreed rules of engagement as opposed to governance do not emerge on the net, because personally, I am not a supporter of internet governance. And what are we going to do about privacy? In fact, that is going to be the first frontier. And the biggest fight in the next 1 decade is how do you keep the paws of the state off the internet, which it would try and unsheath in the name of security. One of the classical examples of this, unfortunately, is an offline example, is the Aadhaar-based NAT grid, which was attempted to be created, whereby all the databases were to be linked. But imagine a situation whereby you are not a criminal. Why would you want your tax information to be in the hands of the police or people who do not or who should not be having it? After all, you give it to the state in a fiduciary capacity, which is governed under a specific statute. So therefore, there is going to be this huge attempt as the net challenges the Westphalian institution for the state to retaliate with all its might and try and see that it can gain control in the name of law and order, which is going to be a direct infringement into the privacy of individuals. And if you really care about privacy, I'm sorry to put it so bluntly, then you should really disconnect from the net. Because the moment you get onto the net, every net move of yours is tracked, is monetized for commercial gain. I mean, the Google hose, and I can give you, 30 more examples of, how it happens. So therefore, if you really want to disappear, and I completely agree with the right to disappear, possibly may just have to be like Osama bin Laden, until the time an ISI informer doesn't betray you out. So be that as it may, let me end my remarks by just saying that, with no offense meant to the organizers, it's a very important subject. But after this cottage industry of terrorism, post-Afghanistan and Iraq collapsed, there's a new cottage industry of internet governance which has emerged. And believe you me, if you let the internet be, if you let it evolve a self-governing architecture, if you let it evolve its own rhythm, the internet would be better off, the world would be better off, we would be better off, and it would actually become a global commons. Thank you very much.
A counterpart of Section 66A, and how this government, whether it has a blueprint to tackle issues of privacy and freedom of speech. So over to you, Dr. Batra.
Good afternoon, all of you. And after a very fantastic orator as Mr. Manish Tiwari, I have been handed over the mic. I really cherish your speeches, sir. And anyhow, I was smiling and chuckling within myself when you said right to disappearance. Who other than you would probably better understand the right to disappearance? Anyhow, we cannot disappear in this world. Today's world, even if we try to disappear, we would not disappear. We would be caught somewhere. And having said that, as far as internet governance is concerned, you were asking me whether this government would like to have some governance or internet or not. I firmly believe that everything and anything in this world that is either mobile or immobile is being governed by rules and regulations, be it human or be it eternal. So everything has to be governed, such as the rule of this earth. As far as freedom of expression is concerned, I believe the freedom of expression, as Mr. Azad was pointing out with a history to it, I would beg to disagree and say the freedom of expression is a spiritual freedom. Sound is spiritual. And even physics today agrees to the fact that creation is because of sound. Speech is just a form of sound. So if sound means creation, then at the end of the day, speech also means creation. And this freedom of expression, the freedom of sound, the freedom of speech dates back to the time when the scientists call it a Big Bang theory, or as the Vedas say, the never-ending beginning. So it dates back to that history. It has no history. It has a history that this whole universe has, because that's where the freedom of expression began, and what we see today is nothing but freedom of expression. And even those who are trying to curb this freedom of expression is also freedom of expression. Everything falls within the freedom of expression. As far as the universality of internet is concerned, see, I'm totally unprepared for the speech because a meeting was going on. Whatever strikes my mind as I hear you all, I'm from a very middle class family, and I tell you what happens. I mean, I used to have a small car of mine and it used to get punctured very now and then. So I used to send my driver, jaake puncture laga liya karo. And then I always, at the back of my mind, I used to think whether he's charging me extra, a single puncture, and he used to say, tire change karna pada. I told, what is this? Why every time the tire has to be changed? That means there's some kind of faulty provisions being played between the driver and the one who's doing it. So next time, as if they could read my mind, the last time the puncture was there, approximately about 6 months ago, the man who repaired the puncture took the pic in the camera and sent me a WhatsApp. Sir, 4 jagah chhed hue the, ab tire change hoga. So look, I mean, and lo and behold, I mean, he knows how to use the internet, and he knows that the customers may be thinking otherwise, that they leave the vehicle and go, so let me make the best use of the internet to show that my propriety is right, that I am honest. And I was taken aback that this is the level to which internet has gone. And let me tell you, we over here in the Le Méridien Hotel may be thinking that we are very intelligent, but we may be considering certain section of the people unintelligent internet-wise, but let me tell you very challengingly, they are far more intelligent than most of us. They know how to use it. They know how to use it for their own benefits, for the everyday life. And this is where I say internet is extremely important. And since it is extremely important for governance also, because every person is within the ambit of governance, internet has to be governed, well, yes, within the rules, within the framework of law, which does not take away the basic essence of internet, that is freedom of expression. And that's the reason as to why probably 66A and the net neutrality is such discussed topics. As far as 66A is concerned, we are political people. I should be very political, but this is not a political situation over here. It's not a political platform. Well, yes, the previous government came up with a law, 66A, and rightly so, in the sense that, well, yes, some amount of governance was essential into the net, but wrongly so, because the formulations of words were very vague. The formulations were such that in the months and days to follow, we saw as to how a simple professor could be arrested just because he has Mamata Banerjee's cartoon. We saw as to how 2 girls were arrested just because they posted something when respected Bala Saheb Thackeray passed away in Mumbai. This is what we saw as to how many times, approximately 10 times, people who had objected to ways of Mr. Azam Khan were arrested. The last one being a 12th class student just because he said something about Azam Khan on Facebook. So because of the vagueness of the words in the law could be misused. And that's the reason as to why when the whole thing went through Ms. Shreya to the court as a PIL, the court struck it down. Well, yes, what the stand of the Union Government of India, that is the NDA government, was, we had through the Attorney General, through the Additional Solicitor General rather, applied for the fact that the theory of severability be applied to it. And if the court feels that anywhere this law infringes upon or crosses the limits of Article 19.2, then definitely the court should strike this down. We also prayed upon the fact that court may set some guidelines on which we may work. We also prayed upon the court that if we are given the opportunity, we will see to it that the 66A is not misutilized, or rather utilized at its minimum best. And the court also ruled saying that, well, we may have complete faith on this government, but governments come and go, the law remains. So it's better that the government should be given an opportunity to redraft the law. So as was pointed out, maybe the redrafting procedure is going on. I as a spokesperson would not be able to throw much light on what the government is doing. Let's wait for it. As far as net neutrality is concerned, everyone has as yet met on any television debate or any platform like this, they've all said that they all stand for net neutrality, be it this side or be it that side. So at times you get confused, since everyone is standing for net neutrality, so why such huge debate is going on? But then you realize that they have own definition of net neutrality and we have our own definition. I as a party spokesperson can only reiterate what the IT minister has said. Internet is a creation of mind, and hence mind cannot be put within boundaries. And mind does not have boundaries of countries even. So internet has to be governed through this non-discretionary manner where the application, the service, and the whole process is for the benefit of mankind at large. And as we all are aware of the fact, I'll still reiterate, because I'm a party spokesperson, that a committee has been formed by the government. The committee is yet to submit its report. The TRAI is an autonomous body. It is moving ahead with its working. Once the TRAI submits its report to the Telecom Commission, and thereafter the Commission approaches the government will take a view in favor of the people, that is for net neutrality. But as far as internet is concerned, I have certain things going on in my mind as well, as Manish ji was rightly pointing out towards China, the curb that China has on net. We have seen that China has banned Twitter, and we have seen that our Prime Minister had joined the alternative Twitter in China before he visited China, the Sino-Webdo. It's a big hit there. But then I question myself, which is good? The development that China has with the kind of curb that it has on all these things, or the independence that we have, probably a bit less of development. But I believe it is always better to have independence with a bit less of development than more of development and less of expression. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Patra. And thank you for highlighting the point. From the perspective of the BJP, at least, the internet is seen as a crucial tool for governance, and therefore it must be governed itself within constitutional parameters. So to perhaps shine light on some of the constitutional parameters and to really examine the role of provisions like 66A, if there is going to be a successor, and some other provisions in the IT Act which have been cited by the Supreme Court as problematic. I'm just going to ask Karuna Nandi, who's a lawyer in the Supreme Court and closely involved with the Shreya Singhal case, to shine light on how, briefly on how the discussions in the Supreme Court came about, what were the gist of the discussions in the Supreme Court, and where it is that from a rights perspective, where do we go on provisions like 66A or 69? Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you, ASSOCHAM, for organizing something that has, corporates, but also politicians and also leading academics. It's a very useful mix and sort of follows the model of multi-stakeholderism that everyone is moving towards in terms of internet governance. Now, of course, multi-stakeholderism, I think, is particularly important, right? Because in terms of who runs the pipes in terms of who provides the content. It's companies, it's also individuals, it's also governments. There's an overlap in all of this. You know, when Mr. Tiwari spoke about the balkanization of the internet, this is a particularly important aspect, right? Because what is balkanization? It's dividing sort of areas of the world up into national boundaries because national jurisdictions govern the law that sort of regulates the internet, whereas the internet itself is something that is much more difficult to govern technologically because, for example, even in China, if you have a VPN line, you're not governed by that firewall anymore. You can get out. You can see the internet the way a Swedish person sees it or an Argentinian person sees it. Now, we're speaking here about privacy and freedom of speech. While they're two aspects of the same thing, and they both flow from Article 19(1)(a), which is the fundamental right to expression, in terms of how in how sophisticated a manner they've been dealt with by our courts and by our jurisprudence, it's very, very different. Freedom of expression is something that is much more well developed. I was one of the people that, along with Sanjay Parekh, a senior advocate, we argued for the People's Union of Civil Liberties, and this was a comprehensive petition. Shreya Singhal, the young student, went to court to challenge 66A, and subsequent to that, we challenged Section 66A. We asked for more transparency and more natural justice in website blocking, and we asked also, in terms of intermediary liability, for corporations not to be forced to be private censors. So what was happening earlier, and I'm going to come to this first, what was happening earlier is that intermediaries, whether you are a company or whether you run an individual website, even if you have a Facebook page, you could be seen as an intermediary. And you were required to take down content that was even at the level of insulting. And if you failed to take it down, you could be liable civilly or criminally in court. You would lose your safe harbor under the Act. Now, this was something that was quite problematic, and both companies and individuals were quite concerned with this. The court in this case ordered, I beg your pardon, that only through a court order would an intermediary be required to take content down. So that's something I think that frees speech, takes away the requirement of companies being private censors, but also protects companies from unnecessary liability. In terms of website blocking, transparency has been brought in. A certain amount of transparency has been brought in, and this is primarily because of we argued in court, and after our arguments, the government seemed to agree with quite a lot of that and put forward an interpretation which agreed with ours. And essentially, they have said that on the internet, earlier what was happening was if I put up some content on, say, Facebook, only Facebook would get notice, the intermediary would get notice, and I would not if that content was sought to be blocked by the government. Now, the requirement is that I must get notice too. Secondly, reasons must be given. Now, this essentially means that the order must be provided to the person whose content is being blocked. And also, I think to be on the safe side, companies should publish that order ideally on the website itself that has been blocked. Because otherwise you lose your safe harbor from criminal penalty under Section 69A. Now, in terms of what Sambit Patra was saying about the government's stand in court, I'm afraid that's not correct, actually. I quote here from the judgment of the Supreme Court, where they say that Mr. Tushar Mehta, learned additional Solicitor General, defended the constitutionality of Section 66A. He argued that the legislature is in the best position to understand and will appreciate the needs of the people. They did say that the government could put some controls and could provide guidelines under 66A, but through the course of extensive arguments. And Mr. Mehta was very helpful to the court in this regard. He provided a lot of judgments from various jurisdictions to attempt to defend the constitutionality. That constitutionality was completely defended. Now, in terms of a reformulated 66A, and I hear that there is another provision being drafted at the moment, and this concerns me, because we have not heard of a widespread consultation. And I think that widespread consultation in this field in particular is extremely important, given that there are so many stakeholders, given that users have, there's been a democratization of speech more than ever before, given that companies have potential liability, given that companies produce content, protect the pipes, provide the pipes, and are involved in all these different ways. Speaking to privacy now, privacy is something that has been a fundamental right in our constitution, under our constitution, as interpreted by the Supreme Court in cases like Rajagopal for quite a while. The trouble is that it hasn't, data protection and the nitty-gritties of how it works have not been spelt out in a legislation. And this is something that has been discussed. It was discussed under the UPA government, and it's now being discussed under this government as well. But we have not, we've not seen enough of a move to have that law passed. And I think it's particularly important. At the moment, the individual's data is protected vis-a-vis a company, is protected under the IT Reasonable Security Practices and Procedures and Data Information Rules of 2011. And that's what applies. And it applies and it requires, and I'd be happy to answer individual questions on that. Section 43A is the provision under the IT Act, and it requires that the individual be informed that his or her data is being collected, the purpose for which the data is being collected. Sensitive personal data includes physical, physiological, and mental health conditions, medical records and history, also sexual orientation, interestingly. It also includes biometric data, passwords, financial information. It excludes information that is already in the public domain. Now, what was happening was that because of the outsourcing industry, and the earlier the rules actually required written consent to be given. But this was getting very complicated because of the outsourcing industry and because a lot of the people providing the information were not in India. So through a press release, those rules have now been changed. Now, in terms of surveillance by the state, though, and by governments, there's an unprecedented level of surveillance. And it's interesting because, we have these very dramatic headlines saying Big Brother is watching you, etc. And nobody seems to care. I think because in our culture, maybe privacy is not something that has traditionally been valued hugely. I think maybe that's what the issue is. But I think what people don't realize is that if there is massive amounts of data that is being collected from, say, one's Gmail, one's tax information, one's personal emails. Say you write to your mother and you say that, I haven't had time to file my house tax, or there is the possibility of a huge amount of power and the possibility of abuse without any laws to limit that being vested in the hands of various governments. And why do I say this? I mean, this may sound a little bit overcautious, but for two reasons, right? When you look at 66A and you look at the abuse of 66A, where was it being most abused? We had Karti Chidambaram and the Twitter prosecution. We had Ambikesh Mahapatra and the cartoon he circulated. We had the girls being threatened by the Shiv Sena. We had, there were some WhatsApp messages being circulated about Mr. Modi, and they were prosecuted. So it's generally people in power who are really able to use, and across the political spectrum, but also if there is a mob that is not politically affiliated, right? Or if there's a person who has, say, a lot of money. So it's generally people with a lot of power of one kind or the other who were able to use 66A that was undefined. It was not used by people who were not in power, for the most part. So when we look at this, the reason that we articulate very clear and firm positions under the law is to balance the need for governance, and I think there is a need for governance. Why do I think there is a need for governance? Because there are ISIS videos, for instance, inciting people to violence. There are other sort of messages, saying that, say, 3,000 people should be killed. And I think that is where a line must be drawn. I think there is a need for governance. There is a need, for instance, to make sure that in terms of, when we speak of net neutrality, that there aren't some people who are only provided Facebook in the name of getting internet, right? And this judgment actually speaks to that. It speaks about content, it being content neutral, what people receive. In conclusion, I would say that, look, a lot of this stuff isn't, I think, some of this legislation was made because there was this feeling that this internet is this vast and, scary place, partly because it's, the technology is developing very fast and it's difficult for regulation to keep up, partly because, one doesn't know who's going to say what where, partly because of its multi-jurisdictional implications. But actually, more and more people are getting educated about it. And I think as we go forward, it's extremely important for all of us to engage with it, understand that a lot of these ideas can be boiled down to fairly simple but important precepts, and have that debate before we come up with regulations or laws. Thank you.
Thank you, Karuna, especially for highlighting the point that on internet governance, perhaps there is a middle ground to be had on having rules and regulations that regulate the internet, but in accordance with established judgments or constitutional parameters where they've been, where there is a clear path where regulation and rights can be balanced. And especially on the concern of surveillance, and I'm just going to cede the floor to Shri Somnath Bharati. He's from the Aam Aadmi Party, and on the issue of the internet, which has figured prominently in the manifesto of the Aam Aadmi Party on three concerns: on Wi-Fi, on the issue of safety, especially of women, and on surveillance, on CCTV cameras. So the AAP has made digital policies in the center and front of his political agenda, and I'm hoping you would address some of the concerns that panelists, including what Karuna, have raised. Sir.
Thank you, Arun. Thanks to ASSOCHAM for inviting me to this dais today. And thank you to friends on the dais and off the dais to give me this opportunity to speak on this important topic. After having heard Manishji, Sambit Patra, and friend at the bar, Karuna ji, 24 hours ago, I was in my constituency. I think approximately 11 o'clock, discussing with Delhi Jal Board that water is not reaching in the houses. I was almost feeling primitive. That South Delhi, more than 50% of the crowd, population of my constituency was not getting water for the last 20 days. So thanks to ASSOCHAM to bring me to this modern age that we're talking about internet and the, freedom of expression. And I was, so when we talk of governance, a lot of governance has gone in this country, in this city, that I've been struggling that water, how to make water reach to these houses. Thankfully today, almost 4 hours in the morning, I was roaming around my constituency that, have you got water, have you got water? So then this is a fresh air that I'm discussing freedom of expression. When I was sitting and then listening my friends in politics, what freedom like Manish is restricted by the party line of Congress, Sambit Patra ji is restricted by party line of BJP, and I'm possibly by Aam Aadmi Party. So when we talk of freedom, so the person who is talking of freedom of expression, he himself is not free to express himself. And when you talk of who is free, what does freedom mean, how free we are, I remember, because after IIT, my almost all friends went abroad, and they are presidents of some company or somewhere. One of them visited me last month. And he said, look, what's wrong with you? You are such a brilliant student, why did you not opt for America and all that stuff? And he was talking about how free America is, and we're so free in expressing ourselves, and we're literally enjoying freedom, and look at your country, 66A, and what sort of... Then I told him, you get out of my office. And I used some wrong word also. Then he immediately stood up and said, what do you think of yourself? You are a small-time politician, what do you think? And he started abusing me. Then I laughed and I said, how free you are. Your anger is in my control. I controlled you, the remote was in my hand. What freedom you talk of? When I went a little deeper. What do you think? How do you think? Who comes in your dreams? We're all ordained, preordained. A Hindu will never dream of Muhammad coming in his dream. A Muslim will never dream of Christ coming in his dream. Are we not controlled? Go a little deeper. What sort of cultures you appreciate, what sort of movies you like, what language you appreciate, what books you appreciate. It's all pretty decided. So when you talk of freedom, then it is that limited, that is after so many restrictions, whatever little freedom is left over, that freedom we are discussing, possibly. And then I recall some time ago in High Court, it's been 2 years, there was a cyber case, and the IO of the case has to produce, he had to produce that computer. The gentleman brought monitor in the court, and he said, I brought the computer. So you are living in a nation, we are all living in a nation where the police does not understand what does computer mean. You go to any police station, have a word with them. What do they think of computer, freedom, information, digital information? You'll be appalled. You'll be absolutely surprised and shocked. When I became a minister in the last government, when I entered into my office, I was carrying my laptop. I wanted to find a socket to plug my laptop in. Would you believe there was no socket? The previous minister, I was told, he never sat on the desk. He said he was always sitting inside the room in the sofa. He said all the dealings took place on the sofa. So you're being ruled. We have exceptions, like Manish, surely. But then there are majority of the politicians. They don't understand what is digital, what is networking, what is IP address, what is a hopping, what is a data center. How do you configure, I can challenge that majority of the politicians, barring a couple of geniuses like Manish, they would not know that email address में capital or small में फर्क नहीं होता. वो भी पूछते हैं, S capital लिखूं या small लिखूं email में? So what I'm saying that we're literally surrounded by situations and left over to defend ourselves in this huge jargon called internet. Internet in India has grew despite the politicians and despite the politics. And I remember when this UID was introduced, and I was opposing the UID when I oppose now. But since I'm in government now, so I'm bound by party line. So my party is not opposing UID. But UID is a huge disaster, huge threat to your freedom. They are recording your fingerprints, they are recording your pupils. And if you recall, in Spain some years ago, there was a blast. And they had sent information to United States, and they could find 6 best matching persons with those informations. So there is an error. I think it's 0.00, some percentage error is there in this data matching. So imagine a population of our kind. Even 0.0001% error is there. What will happen? Somebody commits something somewhere, that country sends fingerprints here in India, and some fellow who's selling tea in Aligarh. I understand tea sellers are no more ordinary, but then somebody selling tea in Aligarh can be caught. So this, when you talk of this handling of digital, I think we are yet not equipped with a parliament or with a set of politicians who can understand the repercussions. So I would like, because this August gathering, I'm finding myself, when I got into politics, I need more brilliant minds. We need more Manish Tiwaris, and we need more good people to come and join politics, and we need to inject more brilliant minds. Because my small little journey of politics has been full of controversies. So when I was criticized last year for Khidki raid, which is fully documented, fully recorded, from point 1 to point last, a fully video recorded event. I don't know who found me raiding, who found me touching, who found me doing things. I don't know. Everything is video recorded still. So much of criticism. If today also you open internet, Twitter account, I'll be criticized heavily. But I have restricted myself. Because I believe in Voltaire, what he said long ago. He said, I may not like what you say, but I will lay down my life for you to have said that. So this freedom surely is a very precious thing, and we all have to get together to protect it. We should not let a set of politicians, a set of top bureaucrats sitting and deciding what to watch, what to browse, what not to browse. This net neutrality, if there was no threat of freedom, then why is it being discussed at all, as Sambit said? So, and many of you may not be knowing, in 66A, I was also one of the petitioner. Prashant Bhushan and I both had filed that application, that writ, and it was clubbed. But then when I got busy with the government, I couldn't pursue it, but then Prashant was following it. 66A was one, I'm not finding appropriate word in English, but then this was most dangerous thing. A inspector level officer can go and arrest the person without warrant. That kind of threat was there. And as Nandi said, that it was beautifully explained that for larger public interest, if there is a threat of riot, there is a threat of something larger public interest, surely there should be some limitations. But we've got some politician interest. That just because somebody criticizes a politician's son, somebody criticizes a politician, and he's going to be arrested in the night. And I'm glad when Supreme Court, Honorable Supreme Court, struck it off. And that's an achievement. That's a very great achievement. See this, the media, today when we see media and the social media, very gradually social media is going to replace media. That's what my take. I don't know if you agree or not. Because media can surely be controlled because it's in the hands of few individuals. They have some certain interest, They're controlled by certain daddies. So, but social media can't be controlled. Thousands and lakhs of people and crores of people, they come on the Twitter, they start saying things, what they believe in. So this attempt of controlling internet by net neutrality is surely to be opposed, and I am with the people who are opposing it. Where do you draw the line, after all? Because as a government, I am, as a new time politician, only 2 years old, I'm of the view, even though I've been heavily criticized, heavily been abused on Twitter for no reason, I am of the view that the line should only be one. If we need to protect the larger public interest, like some malicious design being injected into the society to divide society on basis of religion, on basis of caste, on basis of region, they need to be stopped. Some false propaganda need to be stopped. But surely not to save some 1, 2, 10, one parties, whatever, some defamation of that kind. That's what my take is. So, this freedom of expression being so crucial, being a part of the government ruling Delhi this moment, I am with ASSOCHAM and I am with you to ensure that net neutrality and freedom of expression on the internet be safeguarded and will be saved. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for that. On the key concern that there are, governments and political parties sometimes lack the technocratic expertise to provide legal or policy input to new and upcoming issues like net neutrality, which has suddenly exploded onto the Indian scene without really having a lot of informed debaters around the issue. On that count, I'm just going to invite Usha Ramanathan. Usha is a researcher and advocate, and she's been working on issues like privacy now on the digital front for long. Specifically on the concern of consultations, whether adequate consultations on issues ranging from UID to net neutrality, whether private stakeholders, most importantly civil society, have been taken into account, and what is the culture of institutional participation in India been on these issues? Usha, the floor is yours.
Thanks. Thank you. I have to say that there are two things that are being discussed here which I don't necessarily see as being contradictory to one another. It's not like if you have freedom of expression, you're going to lose privacy, or that if you want privacy, you've got to give up some part of your freedom of expression. I think very often it's important the kind of questions we ask. One of the things that I'm finding missing in much of our discussion, I don't mean just here, I'm saying in many of the places where I go and we hear discussions, we haven't been able to arrive at some understanding of what the basic principles are by which we will go. There are no principles emanating. There's constantly talk about policy creation and trying to figure out how we can manage things. But the idea of establishing certain basic principles haven't come. I'm not going to pretend like I have all those principles with me and I can just offer them here. I don't, but I think that discussion definitely needs to be had. Somnath moved from a disillusionment about the idea of freedom to saying that he believed in freedom. I think I'll stay with your latter part about believing in freedom. Actually, there is one person who helped us understand the Constitution, who I tend to quote quite often, and I think he's useful for us to remember. That's Kannabiran, who was a lawyer in Andhra, and he's understood the Constitution the best as far as I know. He taught us to understand that, we have fundamental rights and then we have reasonable restrictions under that. And he said, over the years, the fundamental rights, which are supposed to be fundamental, have given place to restrictions that have become fundamental. And what is left over after all the restrictions have been cast, that is left over as rights, which we can then exercise with permission from some agency. And this is actually true across the board. As a civil liberties person, I can tell you that on every freedom, every fundamental freedom, we find that the restrictions have far overtaken the right itself. That's a caution that I think we need to carry into this internet debate. That when we start talking about, you see, I must confess, the word governance puts me off like nobody's business. It's not a word that we had, you know, we didn't have an Indian governance service. We had an Indian administrative service because the administrators were supposed to operate within the law. And then you have World Bank coming along and creating these new, the language that World Bank creates, I think we should put out of all our dictionaries. They bring this thing in called governance, where the idea is that, you know, things are not working properly. We need things to get, you know, to happen. And therefore, in the process of instituting this thing called governance, the governors are allowed to stay above the law, and they can then use the law, selectively if they will, to impose it on the people who they are governing. I must confess that, I mean, I belong to a generation which was born soon after independence, and I believe in independence. I am not going to be governed by anybody. It makes no difference. You can put me in prison for it, I will not be governed there either. There is a certain value to freedom and to not being governed, which we have not understood at all. And there is a value to saying that an administrator stays within the law, and the law can be stretched for the user, for the person, for the individual. And that's got lost over these years. I think these need to be, I'm just saying some of the things that we've learned over the years in multiple other arena, which we need to introduce into the internet arena too, to understand what it is. There is another aspect that worries a person like me, and that is this, that, you know, over the past 20 years, we've seen an extraordinary closeness between governments and corporations. Asochan perhaps wouldn't worry too much about it, I would. It worries me deeply that the center of political power and the center of economic power are getting so close that they share things with each other. I think if we don't study Snowden, and it's, you know, we need to study Snowden not only for what the relationship was between the companies that were there at that time, and I mean the companies as they were then, and the US government, but we also need to understand it to see how a population reacted to it. There was a John Oliver show recently, if you saw that, and he goes to the people and asks them, you know, what do you know about Snowden? Do you know who Snowden is? What did he do? And they say, I think he gave away some secrets to some foreign powers. They have no idea who Edward Snowden is. And that poor man is sitting there trying to save freedom for these set of people where there's an invasion into their lives through the use of this free thing called the internet. And at the end of that, he goes back again to those same people. One of the questions that he asked them, he says, you know, there are going to be nude photographs of yours that are going to be put up on the net. Is it all right that that happens? So they say, no way. If that happens, I'm going to make sure that there is a law that says it should not happen. It's completely unacceptable. So maybe there is something wrong in the way in which we have talked privacy to people, that people don't understand the value of privacy to them. Privacy is not just about my neighbor not knowing about me. It's far more than that. At this point, it has reached a level where privacy is very akin, it's very close to personal security. There is an enormous amount. I mean, I think one of the tragedies of the internet is people who don't understand what the value of the net is. You know, Foucault is a favorite among social scientists. So I must say that, you know, with Foucault saying that, you know, when you have an instrument, when you have a tool, you use the tool, for which you have to control the tool. You control it, not somebody controls it on your behalf and tells you how to use it. You control the tool. But when you start allowing the tool to control you, then you are no longer in control, but after a while you don't know it. So I think somewhere we've reached that point on the internet where we don't know whether we are using the internet or there is something in that whole system which is completely swamping our lives. I don't think we yet know enough or have understood enough for us to arrive at any kind of a decision about what this is. But I think these are things we need to think about. I was really interested, I know this is a little bit of a diversion, but I was very interested to hear Mr. Tiwari talk about the UID, the Aadhaar project and NatGrid, because it's your government that gave us such a hard time on it, and it was extreme irresponsibility, which continues. This government continues with that irresponsibility and perhaps carries it a few steps further. But the idea and the, the kind of argument that was given to us was, what privacy? What are you talking about privacy? You want some convenience. Mr. Nilekani has this good marketing technique, and he would tell us, what's all this? You want convenience? You give up privacy. You've got to give something to get something. I think as a constitutional lawyer, maybe as a marketing man that would have seemed fine, but as a constitutional lawyer, I can tell you this, that there is no such thing as a waiver of fundamental rights. That is a basic principle. You can't, even if I say I will give it up, I'm willing to give it up, there is no such thing as a waiver of fundamental rights. Any government is duty bound to ensure that those rights do not get lost. And that loss of freedom is something that a government should be guarding us against. But today we are in a position where data has become the new property, and everybody is looking to see what they can get. I mean, there is an enormous amount of talk about the GST coming up, but I see very little talk about what the back office of the GSTN is going to be, where private companies are going to be handling and managing and profiting from governmental data, which the government will then have to buy back from them. And I don't see why there's no debate on that at all. So there are many black spots in our understanding, you know, the dark corners that you're talking about in our understanding of what this internet is doing. And one of the arguments on the UID was, what privacy are you talking about? You know, on Google I can get everything already. You just have to click on the Election Commission website, and along with your photograph and your address and your, all the information is there. This is not about managing the internet. It's about managing the Election Commission. And I think we need to keep making those distinctions. There are certain things that agencies do not have a right to do. They had no right to put this up on the internet. To try and bring in governing the internet is barking up the wrong tree. So I just think that if we ask the wrong questions, we're going to come up with the wrong answers. I don't intend to go on, for much longer. I think we can discuss much of this. But there are a variety of things, some of it in the context of surveillance, a lot of it in the context of freedoms and the understanding of freedoms, where corporations today have started saying that they need their fundamental rights and therefore they need to be protected from people. I think we need to think a little bit about what it means. We do need to think very long and hard and deep about what this relationship between the state and the corporation is emerging to being. There are many things, when the Snowden revelations happened, somebody had gifted me a book and I was reading it. I had no idea about what this was. And I read it and I said, and as I was reading it, the newspapers were reporting Snowden. And I said, God, but how did this Glenn Greenwald already write about this? And then when I read a little closer, I found, no, this isn't what was happening now. It is something that had happened in 2005. And what had they done? The same thing had already happened in 2005, where it had already been exposed and there was embarrassment about it. The companies were worried, Google and all the rest of them were worried, because they could be taken to court by the American population under the Privacy Act. So they changed the law retrospectively to protect the companies. So the power that the state has to make law, to change law, to break law, to stay above the law is something that is being shared by the corporate world today. And I think one of the reasons I agreed to come here and speak was also because I felt, I talk to the converted a lot, but when I talk to the people who are in that corporate world and you're able to take that responsibility on yourself to see what that almost level of collusion means, that might be the first step towards protecting and preserving freedoms. Thank you.
Thank you, Usha. We've already overshot our time by a few. So what I'm going to do is, if there are questions, we'll take a handful, maybe 3 or 4, and we'll have the questions at one go. And if you have a question addressed to a specific speaker, what is left of the panel, we can, please address it to that speaker specifically. So, questions? Please, yeah. Can you use the mic, please?
Is there any law for privacy in India, or new law is required? Whether as per existing laws, existing rules, this privacy can be ensured, or as per the Article 21 of the Constitution, as per the 2011 rules, they are sufficient enough, or new law is required?
Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah.
This is also to both Mr. Tiwari and Usha. One of the when Mr. Tiwari said that maybe internet cannot be governed and we should probably stay away from trying to govern it, regulate it, etc., etc. the one thing that struck my mind is that the state is, we see the state not necessarily as an agency that keeps away from our media and therefore guarantees us freedoms. But there is also a lot of us do see the state sometimes as a change agent where it protects and guarantees freedoms for it. As far as free speech is concerned, we've seen with WikiLeaks, for example, where just by a feeler that was sent from the federal government to the Amazon, the first, when WikiLeaks first came out, it had been hosted on Amazon servers and that content was taken down. So, even in the Supreme Court case, this has not quite been dealt where the rights, because the medium itself is now controlled largely by a few corporates, and when we think of exercising our rights within that medium, we do not have any means of justicing those. So this is something that I wanted to ask.
Thank you. Yeah. So there's a question here.
Hello, thank you. I am Ravinder Singh. I am inventor. My question is to Mr. Manish Tiwari. This 66A Act is, history now. But the biggest thing is that, even recently, yesterday we passed a law on black money. Nowhere, it describes, how black money is generated. You should actually also describe, you should be preventing generation of black money. You are only interested in penalizing some people, on some police case. So you should be also preventing, you can say, generation of black money. That thing is not explained anywhere.
Thank you, sir. I'm wondering how this relates to what we've been talking about.
Actually, it's about lawmaking, It was a bad law, and this law is also
Let's
bad.
keep it to the topic at hand. Okay, thanks. Any other questions? Or I can perhaps close comments. Great. So we have three broadly, and I'm going to leave it to panelists. I think one was specifically addressed to Usha on privacy law, then Shri Tiwari on the role of the state, and two questions rather, on whether there needs to be a fundamental re-envisioning of the state on protecting and guaranteeing rights. Usha, you want to take this? One of you can answer.
Look, the reason why I don't favor state intervention into the internet is because there is a need to get real. And the reality of intergovernmental negotiations is that till today, notwithstanding whatever is happening in the world, including the Islamic State phenomena, the world has not been able to agree to a common definition of terrorism. So therefore, when you cannot agree on something as existential as that, to think that you will be able to come up with an overarching architecture of governance of the internet, which you do not even fully understand, is, for the lack of a better word, a pie in the sky. So the better thing to do is that you set your targets a little lower and try and see if you can have certain agreed rules of engagement. Agreed rules of engagement essentially would mean that there is a common minimum compact about what should not be allowed or what should be excluded as opposed to what is included. Because the real difficulty is when our colleague here was referring to the hardware of the net, the pipes and the routers and the transmissions, the more the internet governance debate will get complicated, the more will be the tendency of the state to interfere with the hardware. And therefore, like you saw the rise of the internet, the World Wide Web in your life, you will see its demise, first by its balkanization, maybe in terms of sovereignty or shared value systems, or you may even have a Shia net, a Sunni net, a Confucius net, or on basis of hegemony. So therefore, these are real issues which are going to come up as you go deeper into the internet debate. So therefore, the better thing, according to me, would be to leave the internet alone, let it mutate, let it arrive at its own equilibrium, and yes, if you can,
try and see if you can get some agreed rules of engagement. It may work. This governance is a pie in the sky.
I'm not sure I quite see it like that, but I think since thought is still developing on this, I can't say anything with certainty, but I'm a little uncomfortable with, I know this is not the question that was addressed to me, but I'm tempted, which is why I said, will you go first? Which is that it's presuming that everything is equal and this is the, it's like an even playing field for everybody. And that nobody needs protection from anyone in this. Actually, the use of the internet and the way in which targeting happens on the internet and the way in which sometimes it is important to intervene, like it was, say, like you're saying during the riots or you had mass exoduses. There was a time when Article 19, for instance, which is an organization that works for free speech, used to say that there are no exceptions. Free speech is free speech and that's it. Till it came to this question of not just hate, hate speech is still something that we talk about differently, but hate speech with an incitement to violence, and when it's against people who can't protect themselves, and the state very often fails to protect them either due to institutional bias or any other reason, if there is no intervention at that time, it leads to the kind of destruction which I don't think we can take as a given. I think we need to address that as an issue. So I'm not very comfortable with that, and I think that's what Karuna was saying when he spoke. Yeah, okay, she'll do the adding. On the privacy law question, no, there is no law on privacy. We have had a couple of drafts that have come out. There was a report that was worked out with Justice Shah as the chair in the Planning Commission. And like many other reports, this is also just got shelved. It appears that there was some interest in that privacy law because getting work from, say, the European Union, it's important to have data protection. Otherwise, they don't want to give work to, to companies here. So there was some amount of corporate engagement too in it, but it's not been pushed at all. And you'll have to tell me the reason why there's no corporate interest anymore in, but it's not just that we don't have a privacy law. We don't have a privacy law. We don't have a data protection law of any kind. It's not just about privacy. We don't have a law, for instance, on the UID, which, it came and then it went and nobody cares. And there is bullying, threatening, telling people you won't get this and you won't get that unless you get onto our databases. And then using that for data mining in various kinds of ways. There are no laws on any of this, which is also why I think I'm a little wary about anything that goes completely unlooked at. I don't want Canada or some American company to be governing whatever on the basis of principles that we set out. I don't want our government to be governing us, but there has to be some means by which we have intervention possible where it becomes absolutely necessary. And in law, we have this thing of the doctrine of necessity, which is like an extreme principle. It doesn't happen. You can't say, oh, today it is necessary for me to do this. Doctrine of necessity has certain parameters, and within that, it should be possible to operate to protect. And that this idea that everybody is equal and everyone's equally weak and equally strong, and it doesn't matter on the internet, I'm not sure it's true. But not having a law on any of these means that the companies which are dominating the internet world can actually do multiple things without any kind of restraint in terms of delving into our lives, in terms of data mining, in terms of tracking, in terms of convergence, what have you. And that's really problematic.
I just want to add to that.
Mr. Tiwari, I really appreciate your impulse. It sounds to me very progressive in the sense of, being in favor of free speech. And I also think that there's a way in which governments have left the IT sector alone and allowed it to flourish. And that's something that's really worked, right, in terms of industry. But I do think that, look, like the telecom sector, I think the internet is a place that requires a certain amount of regulation even to ensure a particular degree of equality, right? Because when you look at net neutrality, for instance, to me, what is the crux of the issue? It is, of course, there are many different aspects to it, but one of the things I think that people who oppose the idea of net neutrality is there's a presumption of perfect information and perfect competition, right? Which is not the case in our world today. So for example, I'm not entirely against Airtel Zero, for instance. There are things about it that I think are very good in terms of access. But looking at the issue, since this is something that we're all talking about a lot, just giving people a particular package, only giving people, say, Facebook, in the absence of a user knowing that there's a whole world out there, is problematic. Because you can't, information is such a thing that you can't just give people one. It's like saying that, you will only get the Times of India and you don't even know what the other papers are, for example, right? And I think in the area of information, it's extremely important to prevent the kinds of monopolies and oligopolies that are being envisaged. And there are also other examples, right? There's a certain kind of criminality that happens on the internet. There's child pornography. And the strongest proponents of free speech do not think that things like child pornography should be on the net. So, to my mind, it's extremely clear, actually, that the internet is like any other place. There's a certain amount of fundamental freedom that is required. There's a certain amount of fairness that is required between users, between corporations even, like in terms of when we look at intermediary liability, the fact that corporates were liable and required to censor, for instance, on pain of criminal prosecution, that was problematic. So, I think it's something that it's important that we engage with. And yes, technology develops very fast, but yes, it is also something in our understanding that we can absolutely keep up with.
Can I just very quickly come back on that? I unfortunately have to run. You see, the difficulty is that you need to make a distinction between intervention in the virtual world and its physical manifestations in the physical world. The ability of the state to protect or to insulate the physical manifestation of an action in the virtual space. Controlling or containing that action in the virtual space, you run the gauntlet of then having to decide as to where do you draw the line. And the problem is that when you are in the business of drawing lines, someone may be a liberal, he may draw the line to the left, and someone may be extremely retrogressive or conservative and may draw the line to the extreme right. So the difficulty is that I don't think it's really the business of the state to be drawing those lines. And therefore, to a very, very large extent, mediums do find an equilibrium of their own. The difficulty is that if you try and push things too hard, like what is happening with the internet governance debate now, trying to get an architecture on it, I'm afraid you will end up straitjacketing it completely. I would have loved to, loved to wait and hear. I would have waited for a response. Unfortunately, I have to get somewhere.
I'm just going to close the discussion with a few.
Thank you for giving me the last word. I started also the first.
You have earned it.
I just wanted to tell you that I'd feel very safe if the government intervenes or there is governance of the internet to save us from the present and immediate danger when it comes to. Referring to that incident you're talking about 3 years back, when there were these ethnic clashes in the Northeast, there was an avalanche of hate blogs and all kinds of material fanning communal passions. And as a result, you were at one end of the spectrum and I was at the other end of the spectrum. We were together, in fact. And from one of the cities, there was a clear exodus of the people from Northeast. So there are clear instances when there is intervention which is called for. This is one instance. The second thing about the data privacy, we could think something like a data protection authority which is there in England. And it is working. Of course, it may not be working very well. And the Office of the Information Commissioner has become now, which hears the appeals, etc. There are data holders, and there is more and more resort to the tribunal which is hearing the cases. Because data protection is something which we need to look at very, very carefully in India. And the time has come when we should look at it. Just 2 points.
Yeah. Thank you for attending. Quick word of thanks to the organizers. It's rarely, it's rare that we get participants from across the political spectrum, as well as they say in the cottage industry, multi-stakeholder panel, but thanks to all panelists, Karuna, Usha, sir, and the others who were here, and thank you for attending.
Thank you so much. Once again, please have a huge round of claps for this panelist. And this is Shilpa Bhavna signing off. Hope to see you again next time in some more summits on the platform of ASSOCHAM India. Thank you so much. Jai Hind.